Nobel for deciphering the science of touch. David Julius and Ardem Patapautin identified the mechanism through which touch detectors communicate with the nervous system. What are the implications of their research for medicines? The five senses through which human beings perceive and experience the world around them are well known. The internal mechanisms inside the human body through which we become aware of and respond to light, sound, smell, and taste have been fairly well understood for several decades. The understanding of how we sense through touch, the perception of hot or cold, squeeze or strain, or the feeling of physical pain eluded scientists for long. Until David Julius and Ardem Patapautin, working independently in the United States, made a series of discoveries in the late 1990s and early 2000s to figure out the touch detectors in our body and the mechanism through which they communicate with the nervous system to identify and respond to a particular touch. For the groundbreaking research, which is still continuing, 66-year-old Julius and 54-year-old Patapautin were declared joint winners of the 2021 Nobel Prize in Physiology on Monday. The Physiology Nobel is the first one in sciences to be announced. The Nobel Prize in Physics will be announced on Tuesday, followed by the one in chemistry a day later. Sensors. Julius and Patapautin have been awarded the prize for their discoveries of receptors for temperature and touch. Simply put, they discovered the molecular senses in human body that are sensitive to heat and to mechanical pressure and make us feel hot or cold or the touch of a sharp object on our skin. Artificial sensors are familiar in today's world. A thermometer is very common temperature sensor. In a room, a table or bed would not be able to perceive changes in temperature even when they are exposed to heat. But a thermometer would. Similarly, in the human body, all the molecules do not sense heat when they are exposed to it. Only very specific proteins do, and it is their job to relay this signal to the nervous system, which then triggers an appropriate response. Scientists knew that such sensors must exist, but were not able to identify them until Julius discovered the first heat receptor. It was a very fundamental discovery. The identification of heat receptor by Julius in the late 1990s came through a very tedious scrutiny of hundreds of genes for their sensitivity to temperature. Today, we have very efficient computers and models that can reduce the work and fast track the process, but in those days, a lot of painstaking research was required. That first discovery led to identification of several other receptors. Just like there are receptors sensitive to heat, there are others that can sense coldness. And yet, others that can sense pressure. We now know several of these, said Deepanjan Roy, a neuroscientist at National Brain Research Center in Manesar. The mechanism. The human ability to sense or cold and pressure is not very different from the working of the many detectors that we are familiar with. A smoke detector, for example, sends off an alarm when it sends smokes beyond a certain threshold. Similarly, when something hot or cold touches the body, the heat receptors enable the passage of some specific chemicals like calcium ions through the membrane of nerve cells. It's like a gate that opens up on a very specific request. The entry of the chemical inside the cell causes a small change in electrical voltage, which is picked up by the nervous system. There is a whole spectrum of receptors that are sensitive to different ranges of temperature. When there is more heat, more channels open up to allow the flow of ions, and the brain is able to perceive higher temperatures. Similar things happen when we touch something extremely cold, said Arnab Ghosh, a neuroscientist at the Indian Institute of Science Education Research in Pune. Ghosh said that these receptors were sensitive not just to external touch but could detect temperature or pressure changes inside the body as well. When our body temperature deviates from optimum level, For example, there is a reaction, the body makes an effort to revert to the optimum or core temperature. That happens only because the heat receptors are able to sense a change in temperature and the nervous system tries to restore that. But that is not at all. When our urinary bladder is full, for example, the pressure in the bladder increases. This change in pressure is sensed by the pressure receptors and relayed to the nervous system, which creates this urge to relieve oneself. Changes in blood pressure is sensed in a similar fashion and remedial actions initiated. That is why the discoveries of the receptors are so fundamental to our understanding of how our body functions, Ghosh said. Therapeutic implications. Breakthrough in physiology have often resulted in an improvement in the ability to fight disease and disorder. This one is no different. As Neha Sasidharan, a PhD in cognitive neuroscience, pointed out, the identification of these receptors open up the possibility of regulating their function. For example, there are receptors that make us feel pain. If these receptors can suppressed or made less effective, the person had feel less pain. Chronic pain is present in a number of illness and disorders. Earlier, the experience of pain was a mystery, but as we understand these receptors more and more, it is possible that we gain the ability to regulate them in such a way that the pain is minimized, he said. Ghosh said, in fact, research in this field was already underway. It is possible that next generation of painkillers would work in this fashion, he said, adding that there were several other therapeutic implications as well, including interventions that might be useful in treatment of disease like cancer or diabetes. Thank you.